to talk about the satisfaction spectrum. I absolutely loved it. I've never seen anything like that before. Process versus service. You know, I'm a maven, so I'm all about process. I don't have to even make books. I just sit here and tinker all day and come up with these brilliant ideas and do all this stuff. But then the service side starts to take over for me and it gets a little bit deeper. Can you talk very briefly about the process versus service and how we can kind of balance those things out? Because I know a lot of artists, I work with a lot of artists who just want to create, but they're not thinking about how they're going to impact the world, which is the subtitle of most of the books, right? So it's like, you got to impact the world with it. Otherwise, you're just doing stuff. But then I know other folks who are willing to what I would call self-sacrifice. And they're like, I want to give so much to the world, but they haven't worked on the process yet. And I think you talk about that in a couple of the chapters where they haven't worked on themselves enough, so they don't have anything to talk about. So how do we strike that balance? And what would you suggest to people who are at either extreme end?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was literally just saying to somebody today that nobody has asked me about the satisfaction spectrum yet. You're literally the first person. um, and I was
great.
And I was actually really curious about it because I actually think it's so important.
Yeah.
And so what I noticed, so there are these 10 different Sparketypes or impulses, right? And I describe them always in a particular order. In fact, they're in the book in a particular order. And the reason for that is that I realize they lie on a spectrum in terms of how a person with that impulse is fulfilled. And for some people, some of those impulses are very, very process oriented, meaning you could literally just drop into your process, lose yourself in that process, and feel completely at peace, alive, energized, like you're like on purpose and you have all the meaning that you want from just being able to do this thing. You feel like you're doing the thing you're here to do. On the other end of the spectrum, people are highly relationable. You literally have to be in service of other people, other beings, other things, ecosystems, whatever it may be, in order for this impulse to find its way out. And we tend to never talk about it that way. And we tend to always say that, the only valid expression of purpose or meaning is when you're in service of others. And that causes a lot of problems for people whose Sparketype lies on the process satisfied side of the spectrum, because you as a maven, you could latch onto a topic and literally just go deep into it, spend 13 hours a day immersed in learning everything. Like you want to become encyclopedic about it, and you are the happiest person in the world. You feel like you're doing exactly what you want to be doing. And if you could earn your living just doing that, it would be amazing. You would never stop. Now, the fact that you're learning something may equip you then to turn around and share it in a whole bunch of different ways that would be incredibly valuable to other people and have them pay you for it so you could sustain yourself. And that's awesome. Maybe that, and a lot of mavens actually tap their shadow Sparketype, which may be more service focused, as funding engines for their maven impulse, which is really cool, but that's actually not why you're doing it. Mm-hmm. And to say to a person who's so just utterly fulfilled by something which is very heavily process focused, that is not valid. To me, it creates a sense of shame. That is just, there's no reason that we need to do that. And what's interesting is that even though most people who lie on the more process heavy side of the spectrum, and that would be like mavens, makers, scientists, essentialists, right. They're really happy just losing themselves in the process. Inevitably, they end up creating things or solving things or figuring things out or offering things or teaming with people who then unlock these quote service side of the things, that their work ends up actually having a huge amount of value to other people. And they love that. And it's really nourishing to them. It feels really good. And very often that's how they get paid to do the thing. But secretly, it's not why they do it. Or at least it's not the whole reason. It's like a nice part of it, but it's not the central reason that they do it. And similarly, like you were saying, if you have that wiring and you want to earn a living and try and make that your central thing, at some point you have to find a way to take the thing that you're doing and have it be valued by other people. So it has to serve them in some way. So if it's the thing where you actually want to center that as the thing that sustains you, that becomes a livelihood, full or part-time, it has to enter the equation in some way, shape, or form. So understanding these balances, I think it's like a fascinating dynamic to me.
Yeah, I mean, I was like, why is this at the end of the book?
Well, it's funny because it's in the appendix at the end. And the reason is we actually couldn't figure out where to put it in the book that made sense. It would have actually made a lot of sense to put it in the very beginning of the book, but it's also kind of a nerdy point that's a little bit esoteric, even though it's really important. And we're like, right. So for Maven,
who are you talking to? Right.
Exactly. Right. Exactly.
Like, this is the good stuff.
So, right. For nerdy esoteric Mavens like you, like, it's awesome. But
I'm in the appendices all day. Yeah.
Right. But what we realized, for most other people, it was a little too into the weeds, a little too soon. So we ended up putting it there. And yeah, I'm actually probably going to call it out a little bit because I don't want it to get lost, because I actually think it's a really important concept.
Yeah. And again, as a fellow coach and person who feels like they at least try to serve other people and help them shine, that resonated with me so much, because that balance you're talking about, process versus service, I feel like that's like the internal question. Because again, if you're just serving, at least in my opinion, if you're just serving, you have to work on something that's actually going to serve people. So eventually you're going to have to go to the process part. It reminds me a lot of, if you're familiar with Natalie Nixon's work.
No.
Yeah, she has a book called The Creative Leap. And it's somewhere around here. So I have somewhere on my shelf. But she talks about going between wonder and rigor. And so wonder is when you're probably similar to a process where you're thinking about things and it's like, what if we had flying cars? And what if we didn't need drivers anymore? They would just drive down the street. That's wonder. Rigor is, okay, so how will we get the license for these cars? And how would it actually work? And how do the pieces work? And so it's this constant juggle. And it seems to be a parallel with some of my work, Natalie's work, your work, where it's not enough to just create, because sometimes making it about service can actually sharpen the process, right? And I would think vice versa as well.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's an interesting example that I love that sort of like contrast of wonder and rigor, by the way. It's so cool. Thank you so much for introducing her work to me. I'm going to check it out. Yeah, like I was thinking of pairings of, I was talking to somebody the other day whose primary was essentialist, which is all about creating order from chaos, systems, clarity, which makes me want to cry. That's my anti-Sparketype.
Is that your shadow? Is that your anti-Spark?
Right. And her shadow was sage, which is all about awakening insight, illuminating, teaching. And I said to her, I was like, I said, this is really interesting. I said, do you feel that for you, the process of teaching is not just like of service to other people and helps you like generate income and sustain yourself, but do you lean on it in no small part? Because that process actually gives you so much more intel to take back into the process of distillation and creating order, systems, and processes, and be able to do that at a much higher level. And she's like, oh, 100%. She said that teaching side, it gives her so much of the raw material that then goes back and informs their very process heavy essentialist side. So I completely agree. There's a feedback mechanism